It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulsen there. And for those watching on YouTube, yes, here is a different place. I'm on Uncle Craig duty in Columbus, Ohio, and we're having a good time, Logan.
I bet you're having a great time. Nothing like being an uncle. Uncle's the best. Uncle's the best spot to be because you don't have to really discipline. You don't have to really do anything. And then when they're being a mess, you can just be like, "Hey, go back to your mom and dad and hang out with them for a little bit."
Yeah. Hey, here's a 5-day-old newborn. Can you hold them? Sure. It's a lot of pressure. Just don't drop them. But if people saw on my personal Instagram, I was holding baby Adi the other day watching film, and I was like, man,
Grinding.
I don't know. Am I ready for dad life? That's what multitasking dad life is, right? Is holding the baby in one arm, rewind the film on the other one to see what happened there in the A gap.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm a pretty strong guy. I work out a lot, but I remember being so sore from holding my kids because they're like a big thing of Jello. So they don't have there's center. You're always kind of like guarding them. But I do remember that. Now they're big. My kids are 10 and 7, so different. But in the beginning, I remember thinking God, I need to work out more so I can hold my baby better.
Yeah, do a little shoulder stability. Yeah, I when I handed the baby back to mom last night, I was like, oh wow, my bicep is they need to shake out a little bit.
What's going on here? Yeah.
And then of course we're mainly on 3-year-old duty, and boy, 3 is a fun age.
3's a fun age. Yeah,
lots of opinions, only so many ways to express them.
Yeah, they big feelings, and they are becoming a human at that point.
Yes,
and when they can't talk and do stuff, you're like, I don't know if I like you that much at 3. So, but
no, my mom would say when I was younger, this feels like a very big statement to say out loud. Anyway, I will always love you. I don't always like you.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, she did tell me that when I was old enough, I think, to handle it. But anyway. That's 3-year-old life, baby. But today on the show, speaking of 3s, we're going to take 3 statements that are kind of the running narratives about the Commanders' offense, and we're going to true false them. And that is how we're going to go through this Philly film breakdown, as opposed to our usual just let's run through kind of how everybody played and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to attack these 3 narratives, and then at the end of the show, we'll get into the defense, which is just flat out playing good football. And we'll talk about some of the details kind of in the way that we normally do. But the defense played really well. They deserve plenty of praise, but just, hey, they did a good job. It's only so interesting. And a lot of talk right now about the team is obviously what's going on with this offense that carried them through the first half of the season. So, Logan, we have these 3 narratives that we're going to attack here. One is Jayden Daniels and whether or not he is hurt, regressing, whatever, but the Jayden Daniels narrative. 2, Kliff Kingsbury. Are we hitting the late season Kliff Kingsbury regression? And then last but not least, is the team now playing at the talent level perhaps that we thought it had earlier in the season or coming into the season? Is that lack of talent that we had ascribed actually showing? But let's start with the quarterback. Let's start with Jayden Daniels. And Dan Quinn opened his press conference the other day saying, look, I cannot stress this enough. Jayden Daniels is not hurt going into this week. Now, the way he phrased it maybe is there could have been some lingering things, but he certainly phrased it as the thing that hurt Jayden or has hurt Jayden in the last couple of weeks is not actually the rib, but the missed practice time. When you watch Jayden Daniels right now, what do you see from him, and especially in this Philly game where he just was not nearly as sharp as he has been, even in some of the other games since he's been hurt?
Yeah, I mean, so he hurt his rib versus Carolina, right?
Yep.
And then, so to me, I went back, so I've had a lot of time. And so I went back and watched, the Chicago game. I went back and watched the Giants game. And then I went back and, watched the Pittsburgh game just to kind of get a feel for what's going on. And I actually think the Giants game is probably one of his better games of the year. And that's post rib injury, right? And so I think obviously if he is hurt, he's shown that he's capable of playing with the injury at a very high level and very consistently. I think even the Pittsburgh game to a certain extent, right? I don't think he was making bad decisions. I think there was a little bit of pressure. I think that to me is where the difference resides. Because I think you look at the Chicago game, that's one of his better games of the year. I just said how I think the second New York Giants game is one of his better games just from a pure decision-making standpoint, big moment standpoint. And then you go back and you say, okay, well, where does this regression start? It doesn't start post-injury. It starts versus Pittsburgh and it starts versus Philly. And now that's where all the conversation kind of starts. So if he is hurt, he's able to play at a high level with it, which is kudos to him. He's a tough kid and he's a good competitor. And I look at Pittsburgh, like what are they able to do really well? They're able to play tight coverage on the outside and create pressure in the middle of the defense while rushing 4. What is Philly able to do? Almost the exact same thing. And so the other thing I'd say with Philly, and in this game specifically, is one thing that we didn't talk about in the preview show, and I'm kind of kicking myself that we didn't, is that Vic Fangio is the master of this like quarters, hybrid, match 3-man thing that is really hard to diagnose. And so one of the things that I went back and I looked at the Giants game, for example, we just talked about how that's in my opinion one of his better games of the year, and how confident he's letting the ball go, how he's on rhythm, how he's kind of got this nice bounce in his step. Hey, we're hitting this high cross to Noah Brown. I'm going to hit the top of my drop, take a hitch, and the ball's out with great lower body mechanics, great torque in the upper body, and a nice snap of the wrist. I see the same concept and quite frankly, the same throw. And it looks completely different because there's no rhythm to the throw. He's looking, he's like, oh shoot, there it is. And he's trying to rush it with his arm. And while he's extremely talented physically, right? We've talked about his release, talked about the snap of it, talked about, kind of his lower body mechanics, how they're always kind of correct. He doesn't have this like overpowering arm. Like I also watched a little bit of like Anthony Richardson and Josh Allen this weekend. And those dudes can like have the worst lower body mechanics of all time, and that ball can go 60 yards. Like it's just, they have a different caliber of arm, and that's not Jayden. And so when his lower body mechanics, in my opinion, are not lined up, the throw's not going to make it there. And so to me, it's not necessarily the rib. It could be impacting him a little bit, but he's shown he can throw with the rib injury. It's his uncertainty regarding the defense, I think, is leading to some mechanics issues with his feet that are making throws kind of errant. And the other thing I wanted to point out, so that's like the film, right? That's like the film thing, right? Is when you don't practice as a young football player, I wonder, and I'm glad Dan mentioned it, that you lose some of the timing with receivers. You lose some of that ability to get to a base. So I do think that's also a factor here, 100%.
Yeah, and you would know this obviously better than me, but like practice speed, quote unquote full speed is one thing, and then game full speed is an even another level. And so if you're going, and by the way, it's even at a higher level, even faster when you're facing one of the best defenses in the league. And so you go from no live reps to the Philadelphia Eagles, and that game is going to feel incredibly fast. And I mean, are the Eagles the best defense in football? They're playing like probably one of the 5 best right now. Yeah. But I mean, from a complexity standpoint, there are few teams that I'd want to play off of a short week with no practice as a rookie, especially. Like Jayden's just never seen that before. Like for all the great defenses that he's faced this year, and he's at this point faced 3 or 4 really, really, really good ones. For everything that he faced when he was at LSU and the SEC, and specifically that Alabama defense, which I remember we were talking in the draft process, and you're like, this Alabama defense is more complex than 70% of the defenses that he'll see in the NFL. The zone match thing is in that 30%, and it's in the top 5% of it. Like it is incredibly difficult to do, and to just not have the practice time. You can do the VR reps, you can do all that kind of stuff. I actually got a great email too that was like, hey, even if he does all this VR stuff and if he does a couple hundred reps a day on a short week, he's a couple hundred reps short. And so from a VR standpoint, from a walkthrough standpoint, there's just not the time, nevertheless, the full practices that you need to let your body recover. And so to me, yes, I could see why someone, I'm not going to insult people's intelligence and be like, why would you say he's playing like he's hurt when he was, just hurt and he's not playing as well as he did earlier this year. But to me, he looks far more like a guy who played against the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles than he does just a guy who's hurt. Like go watch other quarterbacks try to play against these teams. It's hard. They put up 27 against Pittsburgh, and all of a sudden that looks like what the Lions did this weekend, because Baltimore couldn't move the ball at all. Like they would have been 10 points if not for that final drive in the 2-minute where Lamar finally gets them going. And like Lamar struggled some in that game, like a lot more on his receivers and I think a lot of other factors. But yeah, man, like this Eagles defense is nasty. That Steelers defense is nasty. And he was also playing at the first part of this season better than any rookie quarterback we'd ever seen. And from an accuracy standpoint, completion percentage, better than any quarterback we'd ever seen. I think he had the highest completion percentage ever through 4 games. So some of this is just regressing to the mean. Some of this is the competition. I'm sure some small percentage of it is the rib, but I really think those other factors are the big things with Jayden Daniels right now. And they do show up on tape in the ways you mentioned, like that Noah Brown one he throws at Noah's feet. You're just like, man, that's a throw he's made all year. And I think against the Cowboys, he'll probably be able to make it again. I'm not really that concerned in the long term compared to, like, oh my God, this rib has changed him for the rest of his rookie season.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't. It doesn't feel like that. At least the way Dan's talking about it. At least the way he's moving around in the field. I know. I missed the TV copy. I know a lot of people said it looks like he's like wincing and like holding his ribs. When I'm on the sideline, like walking the bench, I don't get that vibe that people are like, oh my gosh, like, are you okay? The trainers don't come up to him all the time. It's not like they're constantly checking in. And, like when I've played with big time quarterbacks who've had injuries, like they're almost constantly being, monitored. And it's like, and again, like I'm sure there is some level of monitoring happening, but it doesn't seem like it's this overwhelming kind of like, are you okay? Do we need to do this? Do you need this? And so again, like that's why I kind of shy away from the rib, but also I think like you did a great job illuminating that. Just when you watch the film, like these two defenses they have played the last 2 weeks are completely different animals than the defenses that we've played or the team has played prior to these teams. Like, like I can't think of a team defensively that was even close, quite frankly, in the first like 8 games of the season. And I know people say, oh, what about Baltimore? And Baltimore is struggling bad right now. They're having a hard time in coverage. Their new defensive coordinator, that definitely shows up for them. And then the other thing I want to say about Philly is not only are they really good in terms of understanding what Vic Fangio wants from this kind of quarters match defense that they're running, but also their personnel is playing really, really well. And they've like really bought into it. And you look at Quinyon Mitchell, you look at the safety from Iowa, DeJean, like he's doing a great job, and then Slay's doing a great job, and the front is starting to rush the passer significantly better. And it's just a different animal; it's a different speed. And when you watch the film, it kind of jumps off the tape at you. And so earlier in the year, like when you're playing teams that play good coverage but don't have a good pass rush, like he could stay back there and kind of. He was never making deliberate decisions, like long decisions, but he had a little bit more time to make the decisions. Like there's a play that's coming to mind where they're running like a slant to the left to Terry, and they've got like spacing. So like spacing is like someone's over the ball, someone's on the hash, and someone's in the flat. And so he looks to throw the slant. They do a good job of dropping a coverage underneath. He goes to over the ball, and Noah Brown trips a little bit. And so that's like maybe usually not a big deal. But basically the hook player is so fast to rally to the eyes that the trip is enough to close the window. And then they cover the guy on the hash. So he ends up throwing a flat to Austin Eckler. He does a good job working the progression, but there's nothing there. And then he ends up throwing the flat for a 2-yard loss. And earlier in the season, he'd go slant over the ball, boom. And it's like, we're not even thinking twice about it. But because the defense, because of the rush, it just closes windows. And like, did he miss stuff in this game? Yeah, but I think he missed stuff because you got to give credit to Philly to a certain extent and say, man, they did a really good job of playing good defense.
So that's actually what I was going to say is I don't feel like he missed an overt, like crazy amount of stuff though. Like I think his decision-making is still good. There's just less open in this game. And again, not to say that he's perfect and he doesn't miss anything. And if there's any particular misses that you want to elaborate on that you think are illustrative of anything, like we can absolutely dive into those. But I do think it's worth pointing out, like, Jayden, when you talk about a regression, right? The accuracy and stuff has obviously not been as good, and we've talked about some of the reasons why. But it is not like from a decision-making standpoint, he's all of a sudden like the league has figured him out. No, just offensively, which is going to bring us to our second point here in a minute with Kliff. There's just not as much open. But I'm going to say that is far more on Pittsburgh doing a really good job with what they do, and in a different way, but at an equal level, if not even a greater level, Philadelphia doing an excellent job with what they do and covering things up.
No, I think that's 100% right. And so obviously, like when you go through it, like with the clicker in your hand, you're kind of like, here are a couple decisions that, would be explosive plays. And, on the first third down, I think we talked about this briefly from like a offensive PI standpoint. So basically what they're doing, Philly is, I forget if they're an empty formation. Washington's an empty formation. No, not. Austin's in the backfield. But basically the linebacker who has him in man coverage like walks up in the line of scrimmage. And so they're running like spots. So like spot, Zach Ertz, who's kind of the receiver, that offensive right there, is going to run a sit. And then Austin's going to run like a rail from the backfield. And so the thing I've noticed in this game is just Jayden just seemed a little bit accelerated, a little bit sped up. He reminded me a little bit of how he looked in Tampa Bay, quite honestly. And so he looks over there to the offensive right. Zach does a good job of creating like a nice pick there. It's like within 1 yard of line of scrimmage. And so Austin's basically like wide open up the seam. And so to me, it's like Jayden takes a look at it, and instead of like seeing it, he immediately goes to the high cross. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a sit to kind of hold the low, you got to rail around to kind of widen it, and you get the high cross coming across the middle of the field. Everybody runs a version of that concept. It's a big high school concept as well. So instead of like seeing the spot concept, he just rushes right to the next thing. And I understand like on paper, like, yeah, you should probably rush to this next thing, but how they're playing that coverage, this backside safety he's not covering the spot, he's covering the cross. So it ends up being this tight window throw. So to me, it's like just take a breath, let the concept breathe, make that throw, and then we're talking about an explosive offensive play, maybe a touchdown. And again, like, is his process correct? Yes. But when in Tampa, for example, he struggled a little bit because he was moving through stuff too quickly. And I feel like that was happening a little bit. And I'm being hypercritical here in terms of that kind of decision making. There's another one later where there's a little bit of pressure up the middle of the field. Zach uncovers up on a sit over 10 yards over the middle of the field, and he just starts scrambling. And it's like, could he make that throw? Maybe, but also there's pressure. There's a lot of things going on here. So I'm not saying that like to your point, he's making bad decisions. It's just the defense was better. They're better coached. Right. They're better executing. And so the windows and the margin for error were significantly smaller. And I think that's the thing I came out with is like, is his decision-making gone completely insane? No, it's just the windows, the timing, everything is just a little bit turned up. And so if you miss it, there's no like, oh, I can see that now. Let me throw the ball like there has been versus other teams they've played this year.
And because they're so fast and so athletic, the scramble lanes aren't there either. And that's two teams in a row that have been able to do that to him, and they might be 2 of 5 teams in the league that can actually do that. So that's something to obviously watch moving forward. So that brings us to, okay, well, their guys aren't open. The concepts aren't working as well. There is traditionally, historically, perhaps, it's not a tradition, it's history. Not like Kliff is like, oh, yay, let's practice our tradition of regression in the second half of the season. Historically speaking, Kliff Kingsbury's offenses have had trouble later on in seasons. That is in Arizona, that is in college, that is everywhere pretty much that he has been. So are either defenses catching up, or is there some kind of regression in Kliff Kingsbury the last couple of weeks that should give us pause, nervousness, whatever, for the second half of the season after he was arguably the best coordinator in football over the first half of it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think when you look at Pittsburgh, I mean, we talked about it in the post game, but like how many drop balls were there? How many missed throws were there? And again, like that, a little bit of that is done by Pittsburgh, pressure burst pipes. Like you just add a little bit of pressure to the offense and guys don't make the plays that they normally make. In this game, I feel like when you go back and watch, there are opportunities if you can kind of work the progression. There's a play that I remember where it's like front side corner, little sit route, and then there's a crosser, and then there's a dig on the backside. And so Jayden does a good job of saying no to this. He gets to the crosser, but they're kind of in some type of match, so the crosser's dead, and he should just rip the dig. Just boom, rip the dig right now. But he doesn't have time to get there. So like in terms of like open concept, like that's open. That's NFL open, and that's a big play. But Jalen Carter's beaten, the guard, and it ends up being a pressure, and he can't get out and scramble and kind of buy time. And so I think that again, like I wish I could. The one thing I want fans and people who listen to this podcast to take away from this is just how good Philly's defense was. And I think the other thing that's important to remember about this is a short week of prep. And I think when you look at both defenses, Philly's defense and the Commanders' defense on a short week of prep, who looked better? It's the defenses, right? Because offenses don't have enough time to kind of really delve into, hey, this is our third down, this is our red zone, this is how they play this traditionally, right? There's not enough time. Like being in a short week, having played in a couple of those games over the course of my career, you feel like you're sprinting intellectually to keep up. And so sometimes stuff gets missed. It's not quite as detailed as it was. And I think, again, you watch Philly's offense, it shows up. Like we talked about how Jalen Hurts is missing like open throws. He's missing guys. He's scrambling when he shouldn't. He's unsettled, right? Same thing with Jayden. And when you watch Thursday night football traditionally, it's usually not a very good game, right? Guys are banged up. Intellectually, offenses don't look very good. It's part of the process, I think,
the week
too.
before the Ravens-Bengals game, it's one of the greatest football games we've ever seen. Big time exception. Big time, not the rule.
Right. And so I think like that's the thing is, that's a great point, is traditionally the joke on Thursday night is it's terrible football. And when you get a good one, it's the outlier, not the rule, right? So that's 100% right. And so I think like there was an element of that too, is just Jayden is such a master of kind of the intellectual process, right? And he just didn't have the reps this week. And so to say that the offense is regressing, I look at the Bears game, they played well. Look at the Giants game, they played well. Look at the Steelers game. I think the offensive scheme played well. And then here we are on a Thursday night game with against a very, very talented and a very well-executed Philly defense on a short week of prep. And you can tell the execution there wasn't all the way there for us offensively. And you're going to see a little bit of regression. And the other thing I want to point out too is, while we're on this point, is the rushing efficiency in this game is way down, which again, when the rushing efficiency for Kliff's offense hasn't been there, the offense hasn't been as effective. So I think it's obviously multifactorial. I don't see regression for the offense. I see a lack of execution versus a good defense on a short week, and I think that's probably more the explanation.
Yeah, let me try to frame this another way too to see if we can flesh this out even more. To me, some kind of offensive regression would be the opportunities are no longer there. Like defenses are just stuck on everything they're doing. And we've seen minimal amounts of that in ways that we've talked about, right? Like the screen game is really struggling as of late. And some of that is, okay, they call it in the fringe red and they can't, like defenses are alert to it. And okay, yeah, if you have some tendencies, that happens to every coordinator on varying levels in the second half of seasons. And I think in the past, Kliff has really struggled to make those adjustments. But in this game, I don't think that was necessarily the issue. And now you've got this mini bye, and hopefully they come out and they can hit some other stuff. And you had some of these trick plays, or, we call them trick, gadget, game plan, whatever level of specificity you want to use. Some of those were big plays for them earlier in the year, and some of those just haven't hit. But to me, that has more to do with the third thing that we're about to talk about than it does with Kliff. Like, to me, the opportunities are still there. The execution is not quite as sharp. If they're doing something that the details are getting lost in the teaching, okay, well, that can go on the coaching staff to some level. But I also just think realistically that when the scheme is still presenting opportunities and the players aren't executing it, and it's stuff that they have executed, that's a tough spot for a coordinator, and says more about, again, it's not for lack of effort. So when I say it's more about the players, it's not about their effort and their trying. It's just their ability to do it, because playing NFL football is really hard and the other teams are really good. And especially the last 2 weeks, you have 2 of the 5 best defenses in football that you're trying to execute against.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And I think when you look around the league, and this is, I think it's always good to give it some context. Like, look at San Francisco. Like, they've had a little bit of an offensive regression. Green Bay, a little bit of an offensive regression. And it just, defensive coordinators are smart. They have a season's worth of film to look at, and they understand more acutely the tendencies of the offense. And it's just time. And so I think that's another thing, is I think this little kind of 10-day mini buy period is going to be great, because it's going to say, okay, what can we do a little bit differently? How can we get to some of this stuff we like with some different window dressing? And hopefully it kind of gives you a little bit of like a trampoline jump for the next 2 games, and you get your actual buy, and you kind of push for the home stretch. So I think you articulated that really well. It's the opportunities seem to be there. And I think that's the other thing too, is it's not necessarily the player's fault. I think you got to give credit to Philly in this case, right? They are very talented. They're very good. They're very fast. The windows are small. The timing has to be perfect. And that's the thing that I come away with, is like, versus Pittsburgh, I felt like we were in the fight a little bit, a little bit more, right? They played a lot of man. We were able to win a one-on-one matchups. We had a good protection plan. Philly just was a different kind of beast in terms of, we haven't seen a coverage group like this. And you marry that with a very good pass rush, and it's going to be really challenging. And so I think the game that I'm most excited for, quite honestly, for the rest of the season is the second Philly game. Because I'm like, what can we do with a full week? What can we do when we're a little bit healthier? Because I think that was the other thing. People forget this too. I remember talking to Bram and London and Kime and you leading into that game, and the team was banged up, man. Offensive line, every single one of those guys has some type of like significant injury that they're playing with, right? Obviously, Jayden's ribs, like how impactful is that? But B-Rob's coming off the hand. Like everybody needs a break, and you want to play Philly when you're at your best. And I felt like this team wasn't at their best.
Yeah, and Philly had some breaks, buys, long weeks, etc. So they were fresh, and also they played like, again, Philly's playing incredible. This is not a shot at the Eagles. Like, they're clearly, I think, the second best team in the NFC right now behind Detroit. But like, they've had some pretty good cupcakes on their schedule. So like, I was talking to someone and they were like, "Yeah, Philly had 4 bye weeks in a row," and I won't say that. That's a bit extreme. They were still playing NFL football teams, but like, one of them was the Cowboys in the first week without Dak Prescott, and boy, do they not look like a good football team. Good news, off a short week for Dallas and a mini bye for Washington. That's who's coming to town on Sunday. The last narrative that we're going to play, true false. So I think for us to play the game more acutely here, Jayden is playing like he's hurt. False. Kliff is regressing in some way, or / defenses are catching up. Like 90% false. And that 10% is the thing that happens to every coordinator. I think that this one is probably true, Logan, that we went into the season being like, hey, this team is understaffed. And then they came out and they have maximized their talent in an incredible way for most of this season. But I do think that the inevitable regression to the mean in the last couple of weeks has shown up. And some of that is enhanced by injury. Like, Nick Allegretti's not an all-pro guard. I love Nick Allegretti. He's a wonderful person. He's genuinely hilarious. He's also a big sports talk radio fan, which clearly is very important. But Nick is banged up, and he's not an all-pro to start with. And so that's going to be really tough. Brandon Coleman at left tackle, like, he's had some rookie moments the last couple of weeks in a major, major way. He's still learning, and that's okay. I still think he's probably...
His shoulder's messed up, too.
Yeah, 100%. So he's got the shoulder issue. He's a rookie. Allegretti, Biotish is banged up. Cosme is banged up. Wiley's obviously banged up. Just finally getting back on the field, it was a step in the right direction for him. So you've got that. Noah Brown, I think he's been great for being a guy that got here the week before the season, but like, he was also cut in training camp, and so there's probably a ceiling there. Luke is still a rookie, and like, on down the list, Diami's had a really good season for the role that he's been asked to do. And then the last couple of weeks, it's like, oh, right, you're still Diami Brown. And again, I love Diami, the dude, but that is just a reality of where they're at from a talent standpoint. I think that with the drops, some of the missed blocks, some of the issues that they've had where you've just had guys get beat, I think this is the actual truest statement. And honestly, compared to the other two, I think that's probably a good thing. One, it means good things in the long term. And two, with this mini bye and then the bye to come, if they can get healthy and get back and, start re-maximizing their talent, I think they can still, finish this season strong and make the playoffs. And then we'll see what happens when they get there. But I think this is the one that is true when it comes to the offense.
No, this does. I mean, I think it's true kind of for the whole team. And this is not an indictment of the roster. I think when you go back and look at the expectations at the beginning of the year, I think, Vegas had him winning 5 games or something, 6 games, something like that. I think it was 5.5. And there's a reason for that. It's, you're starting a rookie quarterback with a roster that's understaffed. And I think when you look at where they're at, I mean, it's exceeded expectations tremendously. Like, look at the coaching that Kliff's done. Look how he's insulated the offensive line. All of those things. And so I think you come in and you're like, wow, like, these guys are really, really good. They're doing a great job. Terry's looking better than he's ever looked. Zach looks like he's got, more in the tank. And then you play a playoff caliber team in Philadelphia, and you see the difference in roster composition, right? Look at their offense. Look at their offensive line just as a starting point, right? They've got, I think it's, how many? 1, 2, 3. Like, they got a bunch of first-round picks on there. They're all draft picks, all those guys, except for Mailata, who's a 7th-round pick. But again, that's a little bit of an anomaly there.
He's turned into an all-pro, so it's worked out all right.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert's a 2nd-round pick. I think late 2nd round, or late first, early 2nd round. AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, like, all first-round picks. Jalen Hurts, 2nd-round pick. and you see the level of athletic ability in that group, right? And then you look at the defense, and it's the same type of thing. Look at their defensive line, look at their linebackers, look at their secondary, it's just a different caliber of athlete. And I make this comparison all the time because it's something that I do a lot. In high school, the talent discrepancies can be really crazy, right? They can be, like you can play a team that's like 6A and they're a big school and they've got a lot of really good players. And you can be in a game with a really talented football team for a long time. But at some point, the attrition, the mental attrition, the physical attrition over the course of that game usually wears out and the more talented team wins the football game. And I kind of felt like this is what it was. And I think if and this is not an indictment of the players on the roster, this is just a fact of NFL football. I'm guilty of this probably more than anybody as a player, right? Is when Logan Paulson's on your roster and I'm playing a lot of minutes, the organization, the GM, the front office, they're like, man, we need to upgrade at tight end. And that's part of the deal, right? They want somebody like Kyle Pitts or, Brock Bowers who can go out there and make plays and elevate the offense in a way that I physically can't do it. It doesn't mean I'm a bad football player. It doesn't mean any of these guys on the team are bad football players. It just means that there is areas for improvement. And I think when earlier in the season, it doesn't show up because you're playing kind of the middle of the NFL roster, in some cases the bottom of the NFL roster. But when you see the peaks, right? When you see the Pittsburghs, when you see the Philadelphia Eagles, it's like, oh shoot, like there are some areas to improve. And I think, again, that's not an indictment of this team. I think back to 2017 when I was with San Francisco, and that team was a very good team, very solid team. But they upgraded. They got George Kittle. They got Brandon Ayuk. They got Deebo Samuel. They found different offensive linemen to plug in there. They brought in Christian McCaffrey. And think about the talent influx over the last, 7 years since I left?
Yeah.
Like it's different. And that's what takes you from a good team to a playoff team. Another great example is Detroit. Like look at all of the pieces that they've added, right? And they've built around there. Their offensive line, the receivers. It's been a talent influx. And that initial team when Dan Campbell got there was not a bad team, but now they're a playoff caliber team. And there is a difference from a talent perspective. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing here. And again, we're not criticizing any of the players because I am, again, so impressed with how they've all played this year. But to go from good to competing with a top 5, top 10 team in the NFL, it takes a little bit more juice, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you just look at what you just said, right? And how are you describing these guys? First round pick, second round pick, like high draft picks. Yeah. And not to beat up on the old administration, just to restate the obvious fact, all them dudes that they took in the first couple rounds, with the exception of basically Sam Cosmi, are not currently with the team or playing any minutes. Like something we should probably talk about on some level, or we will talk about with the defense, is like Michael Davis is out there playing over Emmanuel Forbes the other day. Like that's a problem. And again, like we've talked about some of the BSJ stuff, like BSJ's in some of these positions because Emmanuel Forbes does not work out.
That's a great point.
And that is the reality of the hole that Adam Peters is trying to dig this roster out of. And on a big picture, like we can be adult enough to say it. Like, yeah, they've got a bunch of guys that are probably on championship teams, backups being starters. They are playing really hard. They're doing an excellent job. They are getting the most out of this. They are getting the most out of themselves. So the coaches, are getting the most out of them. The players, are getting the most out of themselves. And that is admirable. And it makes them really fun to root for because they're always going to be a bit of a scrappy underdog until Peters gets the rest of the players that he wants over the long term in. But that is going to be a multiple draft and free agency signings process. And it's for them, it's like why you go get a Marshawn Lattimore, right? Lattimore instantly becomes one of the best, most talented players on the roster the second he takes the field, because they just don't have those blue chip kind of guys. And that's something that we've talked about in the offseason. And so, Duran's still there, but he's not exactly playing at a blue chip level right now. There's a couple other guys that, Terry's playing at a pretty blue chip level right now, but he's a third rounder that's worked out far beyond anything anyone would ever imagine. But he's not Justin Jefferson. He's not AJ Brown. And so one of the things that then happens is every success you have basically has to be schemed up, because it's not going to be Saquon Barkley slipping a tackle on a simple check down and getting a 60-yard touchdown. That's just not in the cards for this football team. And so you have to have your scheme work at an extraordinarily high level. And if you get one of these teams where they can just have a player make a play and blow up your scheme, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. And I think that's happened to an extent the last couple of weeks, where there's just not the guys around to elevate. And Terry's done some of it. Jayden obviously is capable of elevating against a lot of teams, but it's a lot harder when, still like within the context of scheme, Nick Allegretti or Tyler Biotish or any of these linemen have to block someone one-on-one because like that's football and the other guy wins. Well, now your scheme's kind of irrelevant. And so when you get in some of these man-to-man situations, not just receivers on corners, but some of these player-on-player situations and the other player wins, and that's kind of what's to be expected because of the talent levels, like there's only so much you can do about that.
Yeah. And so I think if you're a fan, you're like, well, what do we take from this? I think you say, they've done a good job, the current, Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, of coaching these guys up, building a culture, and getting guys to punch above their weight. And those are the best teams to play for. Like when I was here in 2012, like that team was a classic punch above your weight class team, right? You're elevated by scheme. Obviously, Robert and like the zone read and all that kind of stuff was great. The defense kind of punched above their weight class a little bit. And you can win football games with that. It's harder when you're playing the top shelf teams in the NFL. And I think that's what we're getting at here is like this team, and like you alluded to, the previous administration didn't do a great job of identifying the kind of the right people to be here long term. And, the draft's hard and all that kind of stuff. But obviously other teams and other organizations, like the good ones right now, I mean, look at Philly, look at Detroit, look at San Francisco, name your top shelf team. They've done a great job in the draft of finding and identifying talent. And that's something that we just haven't done here with the Washington Commanders. So, but again, like this team's good. I think they're a good team. It's just when you're playing, again, the big dogs, you got to be locked in 100% because your margin for error is just so small.
100%. And the last thing I'll just add real quick is, well, does that mean that they just can't beat big teams? Because that's one of the other narratives, right? It's like, oh, they can't beat a good team.
You're right.
And it's like, no, they probably won't. Like if we're being totally honest, like they're the underdogs. That's what being an underdog is.
Like
they play
if you run
win.
the sim, right? If you run the sim, right, it's like 60-40, right? It's like you do your like 60% of the time they're going to win because they're a more talented team. But look at the freaking Pittsburgh game, man. Pittsburgh went toe-to-toe with what I believe is one of the best teams in football and beat them. They beat Baltimore. They made Lamar Jackson look a little bit out of sorts, that whole team. They found turnovers. And we, the Commanders, are like probably 2 big throws and a draw away from winning that game on a last second possession. And that speaks to defensively where we're at, offensively what Kliff's doing. Like this is a good football team. They can be good. I'm very confident, and this is going to sound crazy, that on a full week of prep, we go toe-to-toe with Philly because our offense is going to be playing better. Like I'm very confident. But again, the talent is the thing that I'm going to go back to the high school football thing. It's you spend all week scheming stuff up, trying to find those opportunities. But it's nice when you got a dude who's just better. And you're like, let's just give him the ball.
Right.
And they're going to win. And it makes it easier on the coaches. It makes it easier on the team. And like when you look at Philly, they got look at Detroit. Like when you watch Detroit, every one of their guys feels like that dude who can just take it and be a guy and elevate the offense. And so I think that's more what we're talking about. It's like, is this team good? Yeah. Are they well coached? Absolutely. Are they playing their absolute faces off? Yeah. There's just a couple things that would tip the scale that just makes it harder for them to win some of those big games, I guess.
When the underdog wins, it doesn't mean they weren't the underdog. And that is kind of the Commanders thing, which, based off of their schedule the rest of the season, by the way, they're going to be favorites in more games than they play than they're not. They got Dallas twice, who's a disaster. New Orleans is better with the new coach, but like they're still the Saints. They have Tennessee in a couple weeks. Like Washington still very easily could win 10 games this season and make the playoffs. They might even win 11, which would be the first time they've done that in forever. Right. But if they do that and then get in the playoffs, they're probably going to be an underdog, and that's okay. That's okay. And but who knows? Maybe they'll be the top wild card team and get the NFC South team, and
it's the first year of what are we going to call that? A restructure, whatever the word they're using.
We're going to call it a rebuild. I don't care what Dan and Adam
call it. It's the first year of that. Like think about where we're at. Like just think about your expectations, man. Like
I know.
It's all of a sudden we're playoff bound. Oh my God, this is so exciting. I didn't think they were going to win 6 games this year. I really did not. Like I was like, it's going to be so hard for them to be good. And the only thing I cared about was did Jayden Daniels show promise? And so now Jayden Daniels has shown so much promise. We're playing so well on defense. Our offense is like rolling. B-Rob's looking great. And now it's like, wow, we should be happy. But instead, we're like, are we going to make the playoffs? And we're all stressed out about it. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
But if they do get Philly or Detroit or whatever in the playoffs, do I think they can go toe to toe with them? I mean, saying that against Detroit right now feels insane for anybody because of what they're doing. But like
Philly, yes,
Philly, like I feel like they can go toe to toe. They probably just based off the probabilities, that's what probably means, would lose. But I feel like they can compete, and that's pretty damn cool. Take command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, and now it's time to talk about a unit that is playing really well. They're playing exceptional for about 50 minutes, and then at the end we had some issues here, Logan. And the issue against Philly was Saquon Barkley. That guy, he's pretty good at football. But when you watch this defense in general right now, what are some of the things that stand out to you of what's working? And then maybe even if it's, fatigue, and we can talk about why the offense is not sustaining drives, what's happening to them at the end of games?
Yeah, I mean, I think I went through and I got to pull clips for Coach's Show, right? I got to pull clips for us to talk about on the game plan, which airs, Sunday right before the game. And we do a breakdown, and Coach does a great job with that. And so I was like, well, let's look at the defense. And you don't really know with defense, it's funny because you don't really know like what you're going to be getting when you open it up. And I just remember started to watch clips, and I was like, man, this is a really good, the way they related to the coverage, the concept is really good. Oh, they're trying to run a rail, and Sanderson does a great job of not biting on the post, and he kind of takes this rail away. The safety takes the post away. Chin does a great job attacking the flat. And you're like, wow. And then you watch the next play and you're like, oh, this is a great run fit. Oh, this is pretty good. Oh, what about this one? Oh, that's a great job on this keeper of rallying to the football and making the tackle. And every single play was like that. And it was just like, wow, look at how, compared to beginning of the year, look at how well ruled they are. Oh, we got a motion here. Like there was one with Noah Igbenogany where they motion, and Philly runs this play every week. So they probably prepped it. To be fair, but they got two receivers to the offensive left, Saquon's in the backfield to the offensive right, so away. So and then they motion the receiver across. So now the receiving strength is to the offensive right, defensive left. And then Noah Igbenogany could easily just lose his mind and start rallying and pushing to that side, and Philly would run Saquon Barkley on a little rail back out and hit the play. But he's standing right there, eyes in the backfield. My number 2 goes away. This is my new number 2. I've got him in coverage. Jalen Hurts is trying to get back to it. The pressure's there because he's there. Great. Just following rules, matching concepts, communicating. It was great, man. It was really, really good. And you go through the whole game. And obviously, like there's that one big Saquon explosive pass, which I think was in the third quarter, if I remember correctly. But They're all pretty good, all of them, until about 10 plays left from the end of the game. And so I kind of say to myself, like, man, this group came and they poured it out, man. They poured it out. They made big plays. Obviously, the Luvu sack. Sanders still had 2 awesome, like, PBU defenses. One of them's technically not a PBU, but defenses in the red zone, or they're trying to throw fades on them. Just played the technique about as perfectly as you could have done it. St. Juice had a great kind of one-on-one matchups with A.J. Brown where he's not letting him get over the top and he's playing through the hands, and great, you're just like, wow, like think about the way we were talking about this group even the week before or the week before that. And they're every week they're getting better. And Joe Witt Jr., like the way he's calling a game, they got down to the low red, it's first down, they bring a nickel pressure, they get him to 2nd and 12. Like he's calling a good game, they're executing it well, and I just can't say enough good things. Another play that comes to mind, because it's the next play after the nickel pressure, is they're trying to run a screen to the offensive right where they kind of short motion the back out. They got 3 receivers over there and like a bunch to block. And Sanders still reads it like immediately. And he's in the backfield and Jayden has to pull it down. They take a sack. Like that's big time stuff. That's knowing your opponent. That's executing at a high level. That's playing the techniques. That's communicating. Those are all the things that Dan and Joe Wood Jr. have been talking about since the season started, and it's cool to see them even against Pittsburgh to a large, again, like we talked about, for a large kind of chunk of that game. Obviously, there's a couple plays here and there, doing it at a high level.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the talent disparity, because we said it was going to come up on the side of the ball, that to me, that's where like the third down stuff, it just kills you.
Yeah,
is where like on a third down, Saquon Barkley slips a tackle and it's huge gain. To me, the play that broke the defense was actually not that big Saquon play. It was the next drive where they have a 3rd and 7 at the 45-yard line, and it's perfect coverage. Everything's covered up. Jaylen pulls it down to run, and it's the one where Percy Butler screams down and tries to knock him out of bounds. And Jaylen somehow keeps his feet in bounds, and with one outstretched hand with the ball, gets the first down. And they reviewed it on the field, and it was a correct call. So, not complaining about the call. But they initially rule him short. They overturn it correctly, and it's a first down. And then the literal next couple of plays are the Kenneth Gainwell 14-yard, 13-yard. I think he has one more, and then Saquon comes in and finishes off the drive. And that, to me, was like when they broke. But if they can just get that stop on 3rd and 7 and force a punt there, God forbid they get a sack, and then it's definitely a punt, because that plus 45 is kind of no man's land. So who knows what Sirianni does? But you get that punt there, and who knows? Maybe Jayden finds a drive, the defense gets off the field, gets to rest. But instead, they just keep having to be on the field, and things go sideways. But overall, man, I think the other thing that stands out for me on the positive side is the physicality. If I'm Adam Peters, I might be giving Jeremy Chinn's agent a call. I'd be like, hey man, one year deal that we did, we're gonna have to see about an extension here. Does your guy want to stay? Even on the big Saquon catch, the one where Butler misses the tackle, right?
Yeah.
40 yards downfield, Chinn obliterates Barkley on that play. Yeah. Like, huge hit from the side, huge punch at the ball. Like, that is a violent play down the field. I've never watched a team that makes more violent hits down the field. And obviously you love them at the line of scrimmage, but like, I think of Luvu earlier in the season on Malik Neighbors, Chinn on Barkley here. Like, they just arrive with intention and physicality that has got to be terrible to play down in, down out. Unfortunately, the offense just doesn't really give them a whole lot of boost here, and thus at the end, the total is a little bit higher than you'd like.
Yeah, and I think it's a couple things there that you talked about. One, Jeremy Chinn is playing like he's a great tackler. You talk about the 14-yard Kenneth Gainwell run where they kind of run the wham, and then and for him to come down from so first off, he lines up all over the place. He's like a linebacker some plays. He's on the end of the line of scrimmage. He's playing the too high look, but he runs down and makes a excellent tackle that saves what would be a touchdown. And again, like it kind of delays the inevitable, but does that twice in the game. So it's not only big hits at the line of scrimmage, but it's also making tackles in space. And I'm really glad you brought up the 3rd and 7, because it did feel like that. And I think that is the thing. And we didn't talk about this with the offense, but I think that's that drive informs Dan's decision to go for it on the next possession for the offense, that 4th and 2. And we can talk about that play in a minute. But I think prior to that, they just played really good football. And I think after that, they were just – I think that's where you see the talent and the physicality and the size of the offensive line, especially in that fourth quarter, kind of overtake the game. But to me, it's like the prior to that, it's some of the best defensive football that I've seen since I've been covering the team here. And I think that's pretty cool, that we took this group that at the beginning of the season, I mean, my expectations were extremely low, right? Before everything started, we're very, very low. And then all of a sudden now it's like, we just talked about how talented Philly was, and they're able to, and then there's missed field goals, there's all sorts of stuff, but kind of bend but don't break, play the game, keep those playmakers in front, and really get some really nice execution from the secondary, the linebackers, and then obviously the defensive line found ways to create pressure in certain situations. So it's an impressive group. And again, I just think this team, and maybe this is the main takeaway from the Philly game for the defense, is they're not good enough yet to win a game by themselves. They still need complementary football. And I think that's where the team is at. Like, Philly can win it with offense. They can win it with defense. Same thing with Detroit to a certain extent. This team needs to be playing together. They need to get good production from the offense to keep the defense off the field. And the defense and the offense right now versus good teams needs that defensive production. And so until if one is kind of lacking, they're going to have a hard time. And most teams do. This is not an indictment of the roster. Like, this is the case for most teams.
Most teams are not the Detroit Lions that can throw 5 picks and still win a football game.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's a great point. But the physicality, they're playing hard. But also I think you see late in that game the mental fatigue, right? Like the second or the final Saquon touchdown run. That's one that earlier in the game I wonder. So they run outside to the right, and Noah and I think it's Sainer still are to that side. are in man-to-man coverage. And so a lot of teams do this. They just run routes with the receivers. Instead of saying, hey, we need the receivers to block and hit their blocks, we're just going to run vertical routes down the field and take those defenders out that way. Well, if the defender is kind of paying attention on it, well, then they just run, leave that receiver to go run free because they realize it's a run play. And instead, it's a third down. They're super locked into their man-to-man coverage. They follow their receiver, and Saquon's basically got an empty edge because it gets blocked up well inside. And so I'm like, earlier in the game, does Noah recognize what's happening and come be the contained player that play kind of needs? And again, I don't know, you would probably know better than me, the coaching point there in terms of how long, are you supposed to check in the backfield? How long are you kind of keeping your eyes on your receiver? All that kind of stuff in terms of, is that a bad play by anyone? But clearly, like, if they see it earlier, if they're able to have a little bit more sharpness, then perhaps that's at the very least not a touchdown. But that's the kind of thing that shows up late to me in this game, where it's just they are holding on for dear life, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to run with Devontae Smith, and then all of a sudden, 40 yards downfield, they realize like, oh, there's Saquon scampering into the end zone.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, that's how it felt on the sideline. That's how it felt watching it. It's just like, they had that big completion to Dallas Goedert on the sail, and you're like, oh man, like.
And by the way, I'm glad you brought that play up. Like, what a play by Quan Martin.
Oh, great play.
To hustle on that play. Like, the never say die attitude that they have was there, just they couldn't finish some of those plays. Quan on that play is incredible, and that ball just bounces right to Calcaterra, and there goes the last chance.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, because it's like, you talk about ball is life, and for him to kind of hustle and work his way back into that play, he's the flat defender on that, and then for him to run back and punch that ball out, is great. And like Frankie Lou was like right there, and it's just tough, man, just a tough opportunity. And again, that's the game inches. Like, that ball bounces a different way, you might have a shot to get the ball back to your offense, who did show some life on the previous drive. Again, it was a little bit labor, a little bit clunky, but there's an opportunity there. And again, I think those moments, I think people forget that psychologically, like the football game, those moments are really impactful, because you're like, that was it. Like, I've been on the bench before and seen that happen. And you're like, oh, we're here. And then it's like, oh no. And there's a huge emotional letdown. That was
our chance.
Yeah, that was it. And again, I think it's like 2 plays later, they score a touchdown. So that's life in the NFL. And again, that's where we talk about the talent and just how they need that support from the offense. They need that to kind of survive. And they were going to have to punch up a little bit in this game to kind of win. And I thought they did a great job of making it a good fight for a majority of the game. And you talked about the physicality of the secondary, talked about the physicality up front. I thought those guys did a good job for the majority of the game, kind of going toe to toe with that big O line. So lots of good things. But again, I'm just looking at it here. Yeah, like literally that play is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th play from the end of the game. So there's that big Dallas Goedert completion. There's 2 Saquon runs in there, and there were 71 plays in the game. And so that's really like coming out of this, you're like, man, there was like 5 plays that were not great, but 3 of them came in the last 5% of the game.
Yeah. Real quick, just a question. Watching the game felt like the D-line didn't play that poorly. And then I pulled up the PFF grades on Friday and was like, oh my God, that's a lot of red.
Yeah.
Is that heavily influenced by those last couple of plays in those Saquon runs?
Or do you think
that the line actually did not play well for the majority of the game?
I actually think they played okay. I think they rushed the passer well. I think they were aggressive in terms of like stopping the run and things like that. Being physical at the line of scrimmage, all those different things. But PFF does grade poorly for explosive runs for the defensive line. And there are times where they're getting bullied a little bit, because I will say this about Philly, like they have a type on the offensive line. They are big and physical and athletic up front, and they get after people. And so I think when I look at it, like, did I think they played poorly? No. Did they have some kind of tough looks? Yes. But did they also make some plays? Yes. And so I do think that that's more indicative of the rushing total. Like they're going to give Daron Payne a negative grade for the tight end wham that ends up being 14 yards. Is that really his fault? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like, should he make that play, or is that a secondary fit there? It's probably a little bit of both. He could have played it better, but that's a schematic thing. And then there's the couple outside zones late where people are getting cut out of their gaps. Like, that's their fault. But also, we just talked about how they've been playing great for this whole game. So I feel like they weigh explosive runs, and I had to look at the algorithm. negatively. Like, for example, like they weigh PBUs really high for DBs. So like there's been games, St. Juice is a great example of this, where he'll have 2 PBUs and give up a touchdown, but it'll still be a blue grade because the 2 PBUs, they weigh so heavily, for the DB. So there are things that weigh more. So I think explosive runs for defensive line is a good example of something that weighs negatively very highly for them.
Yeah. Which, I mean, all in all kind of tracks because, those are the plays that when you look at the final score, it's like, oh, yeah, that's where the points came from. But I was like, down and down out. I didn't think Duran played that badly. And then his grade is a what now? So I wanted to make sure that we double check that on the way out. But hey, Logan, that's all behind us now. And you know what it is, right?
Well, it's Dallas week.
It is Dallas week. We will preview Commanders and Cowboys on Thursday on the show. We will put on our hazmat suits and go watch Cowboys film. Yikes. The Cooper Rush experience, baby. Let's get into it. So we'll talk about that on Thursday. Everyone have a great week until then. And thanks for watching and listening to Take Command. By the way, if you made it this far, subscribe. You clearly like the show. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.